Hi, welcome to my life. My name is Alexis, and I'm about 2 glasses of Merlot in, and I have decided to make myself a little television review for the first time ever, and I would like to do so of one of my favorite shows on television currently, Mr. Pickles on Adult Swim. I feel like the show is very, very, very underrated, first of all. Almost everyone I've talked to has never, ever even heard of this show's existence. There might be like 2 other people that are at minimum peripherally aware of it and at maximum converted to it by me. But I just think it's an incredible show. It's been on since about 2014, and just based on the pilot to the first season, I don't think anyone could ever have guessed the trajectory of growth that the show would take. I know the original plan, according to the creators of the show, is really just supposed to be kind of like a twisted spoof on Lassie, about this demonic dog who is just going to murder people for the sake of murdering them, and just kind of like basically set up these faux mysteries, so to speak, by killing the people himself, and then, coming to save the day at the end by solving them. And it was going to take place in the 50s, and it was really just going to be nothing more than just kind of like an episodic thing like that. Again, just kind of like Lassie with the dark, macabre little spin to it. I personally really adore the choices that they made at the end. Sorry. Instead of taking place in the 50s, first of all, it took place in the modern day. The show focuses on a lot of commentary about how, I guess, we as a society are kind of getting lost in our technology. It takes place in a town called Old Town, which ironically is not very old, because its citizens are more or less just kind of drowning in the technological advances of the day. And the family that it follows is probably the closest thing to old that you could consider in Old Town. The Goodmans, Beverly, Stanley, Tommy, their child, and of course, Mr. Pickles. How do I even describe it? Again, not to repeat myself, but I will repeat myself. First season, there is just really no way, I don't think, that you could have predicted that it would take the trajectory that it ended up taking in its third season. Third season finished airing sometime in like late March of this year. But basically, it started off like really simply and formulaically. I've always enjoyed it, but it was formulaic. It was one of Adult Swim's many 11-minute shows. Started off with, some shitty person, more or less, in the beginning of the episode doing something shitty. And then Mr. Pickles would kill them, and then Tommy, his boy, would call for him, and then the title sequence would begin. And a lot of the episode was more or less just centered around the sheriff or Tommy's grandpa trying to get to the bottom of where this dead person may be, or, their general whereabouts. Tommy's grandpa, how could I forget him? He is the only one in the Goodman family that was aware of Mr. Pickles being demonic. He would spend much of each episode trying to reveal Mr. Pickles' demonic origins to the rest of the family. No one would believe him, obviously, because Mr. Pickles is dog. The sheriff would come in at the end of the episode in, at least several cases to pin the murder on the wrong person, because Mr. Pickles would spend the remainder of the episode finding other shitty people in town and then pinning, the first person's murder on the other shitty people. So then it was kind of like an ends justifies the means kind of deal, where, like, even though the shitty person was innocent of murder, they were still really shitty. So if you were going to see someone take the fall for something really bad, it kind of still feels satisfying to see the wrong person accused. And then the grandpa would always be perceived as loony because he's old and losing his mind and whatever. It was just kind of a very episodic, closed, open and shut kind of arc for each episode. Starting in season 2, and even more so in season 3, show really, really stepped up. Again, I was always a fan of the show, but the show went from being entertaining to, in my opinion, very unforgettable. For one thing, I noticed that they started putting a huge focus on the musical talent in each of the episodes, What I mean by that is they just started featuring a lot of really fucking good music in, like, probably half of each season. I probably haven't done as much research on this as I should have, but apparently the creators were just really, really, really into music. And I guess they would just research a lot of bands or do whatever they did in order to find some really great undiscovered talent or songs you'd never heard of before outside of the episodes. And, right from the first episode of season 2, I just noticed that really nice change, and it honestly made the show have a little more gravity to it than it did in season 1. And I was just like, wow, this seems a little more advanced. I am going to continue this. And the show is just not disappointed. I'm just going to skip around a little bit to season 3 in particular. I just basically have some bullet points that I jotted down on my end for how the show has really, really grown, and basically just my favorite elements of its growth. In no particular order, I guess just the way that they manifested in my mind, I'll just kind of, like, tally up what my favorite absolute changes to the show have been. Number 1, the development of Beverly Goodman. Anyone out there that has watched the show knows exactly what I'm talking about, I think. If you watch the pilot episode, Beverly is literally nothing more than a sex joke. She is extremely well endowed. She literally has, like, icicle pointed nipples pointing through her shirt. And in the pilot episode, the humor through a few of the characters is really sophomoric. I laughed, but, it was nothing to write home about in terms of the sex jokes they were using. They had this, like, one running joke throughout the entirety of the episode where it started with Beverly just making a bunch of accidental sexual innuendos to the sheriff, and then that was continued with the grandpa with the sheriff, and then it wrapped up with the little boy named Tommy and the sheriff. It was basically just, like, telling the sheriff repeatedly to come over and over again. First it started with coming in the house, and then it was coming to see a crime scene, and then, oh, you came to the scene of the crime just in time. Kind of dumb stuff, to be honest. So that was Beverly's, like, opening role. And she came off as kind of a ditz, to be honest, like, very airheaded, but very nice and lovable. But you could see, as the show progressed, jumping back to season 2 really quick, that, like, Beverly started getting inchingly more dissatisfied with her life as a domestic. And season 2 finale was actually her just having, like, a complete breakdown. And she cursed at her husband for being unappreciated for everything she did. And it ended with her basically, saying, things are going to change around here from now on. And then it's very clear she was having a breakdown. And it shows in that episode that a lot of it was led not only by her dumb husband and her kind of just this dumb, clueless son just totally ignoring her needs and not appreciating her as an autonomous person, but it turns out that her mom, who up to this point is believed to have passed away a long time ago, was a real bitch. Total cunt status. And was just emotionally abusive. That's made very evident by the end of the episode. Season 3, they actually tackle that right in the beginning. And you see that the mom is really a monster, and they kill the mom off at the end of the episode. And from there, Beverly just soars as a human being. You find out she's a really talented baker, though you kind of know that in season 1, but they highlighted it even more in season 3. In addition to being apparently a very gifted baker, she also is a real handyman. Spoiler alert, in my favorite episode of the season, she fashions a functioning motorcycle from a bunch of baking equipment and a cake, more or less. You'd have to really see the episode, I guess, to fully appreciate what I'm saying. And she's also very strong. In one of the episodes in season 3, I believe the 4th episode titled Telemarketers of the Devil, she apparently knows how to ride a horse. She can probably fire a gun, and she's fucking assertive. That's really highlighted in episodes 1, 3, oh god, 3, 4, and 8. She's a very multifaceted individual. She's also, like, a skateboarder, apparently. She likes aerobics. She also is hinted at being a talented singer and also knowledgeable in wildlife. That actually is even showcased a little bit in season 1. But it is just so beyond satisfying to see someone who's really just been the family's doormat for so long step up and be this, like, confident, really nice, sexy, sassy individual. Who Mr. Pickles is, in my opinion, very rightly in love with. Oh, and also they explored her sexuality a lot, and that's a lot of fun. Second point, you see a lot more growth in Tommy, the, little boy in the family as well. Season 1, he's a 6-year-old who's handicapped. He has leg braces. They never tell you exactly why he has them or when he has them. I have a fun little theory about that maybe I can go into in a future episode if I decide to make another one of these. But he's just kind of, like, featured as, like, a sweet, naive little simpleton, like an airhead, kind of like his mom, throughout a lot of season 1, and also for a good deal of season 2, but in season 3, he sees, like, remarkable growth. For one thing, they actually finally enroll him in school. I don't know why. I feel like make some hints as to why maybe he wasn't enrolled in school sooner, but he doesn't begin going to school for the first time until 6th grade, and he starts in 1st grade. And what I really love about what the creators did was that even though this boy is handicapped and ridiculed by a few kids in his town, he ends up being, like, one of the most confident, self-assured people in his class. And he ends up also, at least in one episode, being regarded as extremely popular. He becomes one of the top most cool kids in his class. And then at the end of that episode, which was episode 6, another one of my favorites, the second half of season 3 is, in my opinion, better than the first, by the way. He ends up teaching the entire school about how it's not right to judge or discriminate against people, and everyone really rallies behind him, and it is just so sweet. It's satisfying, it's hilarious, it's wholesome, and it's just great to see him kind of, like, come into his own. He's commanding in a future episode, in episode 9, where he, is the head of his own cartoon in the school, and he's, like, overseeing his classmates who have previously bullied him. Even in episode 3, where he temporarily gains the ability to walk through the help of some sentient mechanical shoes, it's just really great to see him gain confidence in himself and, like, assert himself against the people who are bullying him. And he also definitely gets a little less naive in conjunction with that. He becomes aware, it seems like, of the realities of bullying. He's no longer just kind of, like, blindly accepting of everyone as wonderful, like I feel like he was in season 1. He just kind of becomes a more realistic, fleshed out person, and it's great that that kind of, like, underdog type of character has that kind of strength. And yeah, kudos to Dave and Will for making that their lead. Also, another interesting change that I saw is with titular character himself, Mr. Pickles. He, more or less in seasons 1 and 2, was just kind of like the all-powerful, unstoppable force in the show, and oddly enough, this might sound like a not-so-good thing, but he actually becomes a little less all-powerful, in my opinion. In episode 4, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, I don't remember naming the name of the episode, but it's called Telemarketers Are the Devil. It's a Stan-centric episode, by the way, and I'm getting to him soon enough. He's, not all-powerful at all for, like, the first chunk of the episode. When he is, journeying with Beverly to try to find Stan's whereabouts, he's defeated by a fucking stone. Which, when I first saw it, I was like, really? A stone? Like, the likely incarnate of Satan, he just kind of gets knocked out by a rock? I was honestly a little underimpressed with it when I first saw it. But the more times I've kind of gone back to that episode, I appreciate that Mr. Pickles being a little more fallible gives opportunity for the rest of the cast to shine. And he is a dog, after all, so, he's not gonna be immune to things, maybe in the way that Satan in a human form or some other more powerful, visibly powerful form would be. Also in episode 1 even, he kind of like, screws the pooch, in a couple of different ways. In an episode called Tommy's Download? What is it? Oh, Brain Download, sorry. Brain Download. His plans to stop Tommy from learning the secrets about himself gets foiled, like, in 2 different ways. And he kind of has to backtrack and figure out ways to scramble at the 11th hour to fix the hiccups in his own deviant plan. So it's really interesting that that's the direction that the creators of the show decide to go and make Mr. Pickles almost in some ways a little more powerful. I mean, sorry, a little less powerful. It's Merlot talking. Because they never make him not powerful to the point where, shit hits the fan and then it never gets fixed. Mr. Pickles always generally finds a way to fix the problem himself. When I say generally, there is honestly, I believe, one exception to that, and that would be in episode 3, titled Shoes, where Tommy gains the ability to walk with those, sentient shoes. He falls short, Mr. Pickles, of actually saving the day. He is cornered and he is about to die. When Tommy kind of cuts in, assumes that him and Mr. Pickles are both toast, and basically more or less gives his last words, and from what I recall, it's the shoes themselves that actually step in and save the day. So that actually is an exception to the general rule where Mr. Pickles is able to clean up his own shit. He really kind of wasn't in that episode. And again, more than a fascinating change to the general script. Again, when I first saw it, I wasn't sure if I liked the change, because Mr. Pickles seemed a little more bumbling than I would have liked to have seen him. But it gives other characters an opportunity to, breathe and step up to the plate. And generally speaking, Mr. Pickles is still more than running the show. So I definitely grew to like the change more quickly than I thought I would. And it kind of gives Mr. Pickles a little more nuance. So that's always really nice to see. I feel like a show always benefits from more nuance and some vulnerability with characters and less. So, yeah, that's for Mr. Pickles. I really like that change, ultimately. Another change that I am fascinated by, and I definitely demand needs to continue being explored in Season 4, Stanley Goodman, who in many ways is like the totally forgotten character of the show. I'm sure that's intentional. I'm really fucking hoping and praying that they have a lot in store for him in Season 4. But he's not totally forgotten. For one thing, you see Stanley spiral into what I would say has to be like a very deep, rapid depression. Seasons 1, he presents himself as more or less buoyant, but you kind of know that it's like just beneath the surface he's probably dead inside, or very angry, or sad, or generally dissatisfied. Season 2, the veneer starts to crack a little bit more. For Stanley, he does have an episode where he's visibly depressed and feels useless, but then by the end of the episode, just kind of like bounces back, so to speak. Although it's clear he really didn't bounce back in any kind of permanent sense. But like, oh god, from the beginning of Season 3, you find out that he was, well, involved in a not very wholesome capacity with Beverly's mother. Basically, Beverly's mom tried to, like, seduce Stanley, but Stanley didn't give in because he cared about his family, which is really nice. So even that's a little bit of growth. Indirectly stated, so to speak, in the show about Stanley, so that's always really nice. It kind of gives a glimpse into his morals. But the rest of the season, he, like, barely says a word. With the exception of Telemarketers of the Devil, which, again, is a Stanley-centric episode, which is pretty hilarious to see. It centers around Stanley and his coworkers, who are all telemarketers, being kidnapped in, I guess, a Django Unchained kind of spoof of an episode, and all the telemarketers are, like, more or less enslaved by this group of plantation owners that don't like telemarketers because telemarketers led to the death of one of the heads of this plantation. It sounds absurd, and I was very confused when I was first watching it, but that episode is actually really hilarious. I have to admire how well they stick to the parody scripts that they do. And also, I mean, Stanley just needs more growth, so I'm really glad that they gave him that. And he was clearly suicidal by the end of that episode. Like, at one point, they're literally preparing to lynch him with a telephone cord, and then when his boss continues just, like, reaming into him emotionally, Stanley is just like, oh, just hang me already. And it's so sad, but it's also, like, really darkly funny. And that mindset doesn't appear to change throughout the rest of the season. It's pretty clear that he is just so disconnected from his family. He doesn't even bat an eyelash when, like, Grandpa moves out of the family home in the season finale, and Beverly and Tommy just kind of give him a look like, what the fuck? He just is, like, so done. He's just done with everything. And I'm just dying to learn more about this guy. I want to know what he was like as, like, a kid, as a young adult before meeting Beverly, what his family was like, because interestingly, you literally know nothing about his background. You don't know if he has any siblings, you don't know if, you know, what his parents are like, you don't even know if they're still alive, you don't know what his upbringing was like, you don't know if his personality has changed a great deal, you know nothing about the guy, and I have to believe that's intentional, because Will and Dave seem like too smart of writers to just, like, overlook the growth of an entire main character. So I would almost bet money on the fact that we're gonna see a lot more about Stanley's biography in season 4, which I'm fucking looking forward to. Also, probably just a final thing to wrap up about this whole thing is you see a lot more screen time for the background characters. To name some people right off the top of my head, Bo Jenkins, Floyd, the sheriff, Linda, Susie, and even Hank. It is just such a pleasure to see shows really pay attention to their background characters. Similarly to, I guess, seasons 10 and maybe 11, if that season exists, of SpongeBob, where Steven Hillenburg took the reins of the show again, and you just see a lot of focus on those background characters that have been there since the show's inception. Well, Mr. Pickles goes in the same direction. These characters that got some, you know, humorous coverage in previous seasons, they have, like, whole episodes dedicated to them. Linda has an episode, Sheriff and Bo Jenkins have episodes. Sheriff actually has 2 episodes in this one season, which is just a delight, because who the fuck doesn't love Sheriff? Actually, he stars in probably one of the best episodes of season 3, which is tied for me with episode 8, Bullies. Susie, Tommy's love interest back in, like, 1 episode of season 1, who wasn't even featured at all in season 2, also has an entire episode dedicated to her in season 3, when Tommy first goes back to school. And I just love seeing her on screen, interacting with Tommy very intimately, and the rest of her classmates even, at least marginally. And Hank, sweet, sweet, prosthetic leg alcoholic Hank. He shows up in very notable ways in the first episode of the season. Also in season 7, which is another sheriff-centric episode. That one's just called Sheriffs. Hank shows up in that, if I recall correctly, and it's just a pleasure. And in all of these cameo appearances, each of the characters gets a lot of growth. You'll learn a lot more about their personalities. Season 2 episode, Mama's Boy, Sheriff and Bo Jenkins are the main stars. You don't even really see much of the other characters, with the exception of Tommy for the first couple of minutes of the episode. And it's just Bo Jenkins and Sheriff, like, riffing off of each other the entire time, and, you know, engaging in dialogue, and having a fight with each other, and Sheriff loses his virginity to a very interesting specimen. I will not spoil that, because I think it's worth seeing for yourselves. And for those who have seen the episode, you know what I'm talking about. It's great. And you learn something very interesting about Sheriff, too. Actually, that's back in season 1, if you pay attention. And if you didn't, go back and do a lot of pausing and rewinding, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Floyd, too, Stanley's very obese and surprisingly successful coworker in the telemarketer game. He is also a main star in the episode Telemarketers of the Devil, so he is always hilarious to see on screen. Linda, fucking Linda, has her own episode in season 5, Gorzoth. Season 5, what am I saying? Sorry, Merlot. Episode 5, it's titled Gorzoth, and it actually centers not only around Linda, but Beverly. It's fucking hilarious. That is also one of my favorite episodes. Linda is a really wholesome person. I will say that much. She is very altruistic, very charitable. She cares a lot about those around her in a way that you almost 1,000% wouldn't expect. And she is also very talented in a number of ways. A skilled fighter and a skilled musician. Check it out. And, yeah, it's just great seeing the friendship continue on between her and Beverly. It's really fucking good odd couples kind of scenario. And Hank. I think Hank, again, only shows up in the 2 episodes. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but shows up in episode 1 in a really similar way to Bo Jenkins, and again, positive he has like at least a brief appearance in episode 7. And these people are so rich. They're just like richly developed. Even in the somewhat limited capacity that some of them are seen on screen, I love them. And oddly enough, they're all really good people. In season 1, they're all introduced more or less as these like gross, greasy, hick-town derelicts, but they actually all are really nice people. And it's just a pleasure seeing a lot of the citizens of Old Town come together and be decent, if not kind of broken people. So, yeah, that's just a bullet point summary list of what I have loved about the changing trajectory of Mr. Pickles. Season 3 was a fucking blast. Admittedly, first few episodes I was a little questionable about at first, but then after episodes 5 and on, I was sold like a piece of merchandise. And now, going back and rewatching all the episodes from the beginning of season 3, it's pure gold. It's the best season to date. You have to watch it. If you haven't seen the show already, start from the beginning. Your mind is just gonna blow out of your fucking head at the growth that it takes from episode 1 to episode last. And for those who have seen the show, I have to believe that there are other people that feel similarly to I do. But I'm always welcome to hear other opinions and talk shop with other Mr. Pickles fanatics. So please feel free to comment and tell me your thoughts. Thank you for listening to this half an hour of power, and I look forward to more. Have a good night.